Greetings, faith family and friends. Some of you might remember the story of Noah and the great flood that was recorded in the pages of the Bible. Noah and his wife, sons and their wives, along with the animals that he had taken aboard the ark, were spared the flood and survived. But everything else outside of the ark was destroyed in the waters of the flood. Then, after the flood, how God had actually said to Noah in Genesis chapter 9, verse 1, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." But then we discover later in Genesis chapter 11, and if you haven't had the opportunity, do read through Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. But in Genesis chapter 11, we discover, and the verses go like this: "Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, 'Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said," and this important verse, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens," or another translation says, "or whose top is in the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the earth." So here's a question. In the building of the tower, whose top is in the heavens, were the people wanting to reach God or wanting to be God? Wanting to reach God or wanting to be God? I want to suggest today that the heart of the matter is made clear in these words that they said, "Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered upon the face of the whole earth." Why? Because this was in direct opposition to God's directive, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." You see, over time, a haunting fear, at least I suspect, a haunting fear had set in. The people feared that being scattered abroad, it would leave them alone, unknown, unhonored, unremembered, unsung, living in isolated communities and exposed to great danger. The fear of this caused them to want to build a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. The ultimate motive is expressed in these words, "Let us make a name for ourselves." From that day on, it seems this also has been the motto of humanity. Let us make a name for ourselves. It reveals a basic philosophical thinking. Let me just encapsulate it in the raw, and it goes something like this. Glory to man in the highest, for man is the master of things. Here's something I believe is important to note. Some years ago, whilst digging in the plains of Shinar, archaeologists discovered the remains of certain great towers that early Babylonians had built. These great towers, called ziggurats, were religious buildings and meant as a means of communication with God. The fact that the Genesis 11 tower was a religious tower and yet built to make a name for man reveals the master motive behind their religion. That whatever it became a means by which man actually attempted to share the glory of God. The towering building was not really for the glory of God. It was a way to channel God and make His glory available to man, to human beings. But then as you read on in Genesis chapter 11, you learn that God actually came down to investigate. And the net result? God scattered them. These people had built a city and a tower in order that they not be scattered abroad over the face of the earth, but that's exactly what happened. So what was behind God's actions here? Ray Stedman asked, is God jealous of man? Is God threatened, after all, by this tower of brick and tar that these men have built? Does it mean that God is afraid that men will master all things and that he cannot any longer control them, so that the very foundations of the universe will be threatened by this inventive man? Absolutely not. But that is the way human beings may want to read this. It seems like forever we have been telling ourselves that we can do anything we want, if we want it badly enough. So although people might actually not say it, but we can behave and act as if we don't need God, or that God is optional in human life. We are ready to dismiss him, or at least to remove him into a quiet corner of the house where he won't bother anybody else, except when we need him occasionally to run special errands. The story of the Tower of Babel is actually a massive red flag to us even today. Human beings in our inventiveness think we can master the earth, but it often seems that the very solutions we work out present even bigger problems, to the point we can no longer encompass. The whole vast scheme of things eventually eludes us. Man or human beings are not able to put them all together. Thus, for man's sake, and this is at the heart of the story of the Tower of Babel, for man's sake, not because God is afraid of man, but for man's sake, to protect man from himself or herself, God says, let us go down and confuse their language. Let us stop man in his self-seeking folly from destroying himself off the face of the earth. Because you see, man is not, human beings are not God enough to handle it. Man wanting to be God. This is why God continues to humble men everywhere, to scatter, to bring down, to bring low the proud. But for those of you who are listening today, and myself included, I am reminded of what Jesus said in the opening words of the Sermon on the Mount. And he said this, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." What does it mean to be poor in spirit? It means the man who has nothing, the man who has lost everything upon which he can depend, outside and inside of himself. Because for these is the kingdom of heaven. When you and I no longer depend on anything in us, then God is ready to give you and me everything that he possesses. That is the basic message of the Christian faith. My prayer for us today is that we remember that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, because without the Lord's wisdom, we will only make a continual mess of things, both individually and as a race. Teach us this, triune God, above all else. Amen and amen.